Good afternoon, everybody. Oh, thank you. I love a bit of audience participation. But sorry to interrupt your conversations. Don't worry, we have allowed plenty of time for conversation today. But I hope you will not mind me intervening, because we are here, of course, today for a very special event in celebration of International Women in Engineering Day. And for those that don't know me, my name's Hayaatun Sillem, and I'm the CEO here at the Royal Academy of Engineering and the Queen Elizabeth Prize for Engineering as well. And it's my absolute pleasure to be hosting you all today. So before we begin, first of all, a small apology for the fact that my voice is very husky. It's not normally this low. So hopefully we'll make it through. But more importantly, just a couple of housekeeping drills. We're not expecting any fire alarms, so if you do hear an alarm, please follow the Academy staff who will make themselves known to you out of the building. There are 2 exits and they will direct you to the muster point to the left of the building. And secondly, if you could just turn those mobile phones to silent, we'd be very grateful. But yeah, suddenly everyone's paying attention. But actually, if you want to interact during the course of the event by posting on social, please feel free to do that. Share your highlights, your aha moments. I think the hashtag should be up there somewhere. It's hashtag INWED23 if it's not up there. Now, I know that we are in a very much digitally enabled age, but should you prefer to go old school, we do have post-it notes and pens on the table as well. We're trying to be inclusive, catering for every type of preference. And we'd love it if you also use those to just jot down anything that feels meaningful to you. And then at the end of the day, I'm going to give you the opportunity to make sure we collect all that at the there's a board at the back, so that we can actually reflect on what you thought was important about today after you've all gone home. So, I think you all know that for about a decade now, International Women in Engineering Day has been a very important way of raising the profile of the really vital work that women do in engineering, and to inspire other people to see themselves in this incredibly important profession. I know I don't need to persuade this room that engineers are very important to society, to the world around us. Yay! Woo! I spend a lot of my time speaking to audiences who don't start from that point, so this is a friendly crowd from my perspective. Engineers shape our world in a very profound way, physically, digitally, the product, services, infrastructure that we all interact with every day. Everything at your table, have you got here? All of this is enabled by engineering, and I think we know instinctively, we know because the evidence says it, that it's only going to be possible to ensure that that infrastructure and those products and services that comprise our engineered world really serve society equitably when there is better diversity within engineering and a more inclusive culture in which those diverse talents can be expressed and utilised. So we know that, but the reality is today that it's still a profession that's in the UK comprised of only 16.5% women, or people who identify as women. And we know that there are so many ways in which gender still plays out in terms of the experience of being in engineering and our interactions with engineered products. We know that from I heard lots of you say when you came in, oh, it's nice and cool in here. But we know, for example, the standards that are used to determine what's a comfortable temperature in a building, through to the fact that we're still discussing whether women can have PPE that actually fits their physical needs. These are just very small, but and a fraction of the ways in which diversity and gender in particular still have a bearing on our experience within engineering. And I am, as some of you know, one of life's relentless optimists. I can't help myself. It's just the way I'm born. But even I sometimes sit there and think, it's hard not to feel weary. INWED's been going for around a decade, and you think there are still so many things that haven't been transformed in the way that we hoped they would have been when we started out a decade ago. But we do also see tangible and important signs of change and progress, and it's very appropriate that we reflect on those as well. So one of the things that I think is really certainly been my experience, I hope reflects yours, is that in that decade or so, we've moved the focus of the conversation from, is this really a priority? Why do we need all these more women coming into engineering? Or why is it my problem if I'm a leader in engineering? To how can we make sure that we achieve this at a more acceptable rate? And that is quite a journey. We're talking about the how and how to improve and how to get better by sharing good practice amongst ourselves. We're not happily, for the most part, although I know there will still be pockets, for the most part, we're not debating the why is this important. I think we've seen important progress in terms of the numbers, so that 6.5% is by no means enough, but it's still an improvement on where we were around a decade ago. And similarly, the Inclusive Cultures report that we published just a couple of months ago highlighted that the culture within engineering is becoming more inclusive, and people are seeing progress in terms of the diversity of our profession in the UK. We're also seeing a more, I would say, sophisticated view of what's important when we think about women in engineering, and intersectionality is now much more embedded in that conversation. The fact that, yes, it's about being a woman, but it might be about being a woman from a minority ethnic group, or it might be about a woman with caring responsibilities. It might be about a woman who is neurodivergent. There are all sorts of different layers that comprise our experience, and we now recognise, I think, much more than we did at the start of that journey, why that matters and why that's also an opportunity. So for me, INWED is a great point of light in a calendar that sometimes we have to be focused on the heavy lifting. INWED is about celebration and renewal and connecting, to talk about the contributions that women are making and why we should find diversity and inclusion a joyous thing to talk about, not just something we need to campaign on for change. And for me, this leadership event is very important within that calendar, because I love the fact that we come together as leaders from many different perspectives to talk about what we're seeing, to share our experiences, to help each other do better, feel energized, feel inspired. And I use that word intentionally because leadership is not a job title. Leadership is not a thing that you have to have in your role profile. Leadership is a behavior, an approach, a role that you play in somebody's life. And there is nobody in this room who's not a leader to somebody. We all influence our peers, our friends, our families. We influence people through our social media presence. And actually, I feel very privileged to have an amazing reverse mentor here at the Academy. There is no question that she is a leader to me. All of us senior leadership team have reverse mentors, and they are an important part of our leadership capability. So whatever the basis in which you've arrived here today, you're in the room as an equal, and we want to know about your leadership experience, and we want to harness that in our conversation. So the other side of that is that we don't all have equality of access to support and experience. And by bringing together some of our earlier career engineers who are leaders but at an earlier career stage than some of the other people in the room, we hope that that will give you opportunities to make connections that will be useful to you, to access insights into what people at different career stages are experiencing and how they frame questions of leadership. So it's a very intentional mix in the room, and I hope you're going to enjoy it. I'm very excited looking around. I'm sure you're also aware that the theme for INWED this year is make safety seen. And I can remember all the way back when we first started working on diversity and inclusion at the Academy, and I used to think, gosh, how are we going to convince this profession where the pace of change has been so slow that transformational change is possible? And I remember thinking then, but we've done this in engineering before because we did it on safety. So in safety, if you go back 20, 30 years, there was a very different picture seen. And as a profession, as a community, we came together and we created measurable, tangible improvements through a kind of systemic change process. And I thought, well, that's a proof point that we can do it. But I didn't understand then actually how intimate that link is between physical safety and psychological safety. I didn't understand that actually psychological safety is a fundamental underpinning of physical safety. It's also a fundamental underpinning of inclusive cultures. And so I thought it tied it together very neatly. And I was really also pleased to see again in our Inclusive Cultures report that revisited the work we did in 2017, that everybody recognises a commitment to safety being integral to what an engineering culture looks like. So that's something that we can work with. And I'm really looking forward to exploring today how we can harness that experience and that cultural trait to go faster when it comes to creating psychological safety in engineering. I also want to acknowledge that this topic of psychological safety can be quite sensitive for people. It might cause us to remember to reconnect with times when we felt unsafe psychologically. And I hope that everybody will feel comfortable in sharing, but under no pressure to do so, if that's not the right thing for you to do today. And I know that we will have a room where there's compassion and respect for other people's experiences. That's really important for the conversation that we want to have. And I'm absolutely over the moon that to help us stimulate this conversation and to provide some inspiration and insights of her own, we've got someone very special joining us today. And this is someone who's not just been a trailblazer, but has been very intentional about creating trails, particularly for women. So Roni Savage is, of course, I'm sure you know, CEO and founder of Jomas Associates, which is an engineering company that's been serving the construction industry since 2009. In 2022, she was named the most influential woman in construction. Just think about what that means to have got there. Just reflect on what that has involved for Roni. And she's also an honorary fellow of the Royal Institute of British Architects, a chartered engineer, fellow of the Institution of Civil Engineers, chartered geologist, specialist in land condition. She's a multi-award winner, you won't be surprised to hear by now, and mum of 3 boys, and is a passionate diversity champion who speaks in a very compelling way, as you're going to hear today, on all things relating to diversity inclusion in business, engineering, construction. And I had the honour of meeting Roni when we were both finalists last year in the Bold Woman Awards. Engineering was robbed, can we just say? No, I'm joking. It's all about inclusion. But what really struck me was that not only has Roni done all these fantastic things, but she's done so with real poise and dignity, integrity and positivity. So, Roni, please come and join me on the stage and give us Roni a round of applause. Relax, we're amongst friends. And we're really delighted to have you here today, Roni. So can we just start with what do we mean when we say psychological safety? I skipped the, let me explain what this means because I knew that you were going to join us. I'd just love to hear you talk about what it means to you and sort of bring it to life with one of the ways in which you've seen it being important in your workplace or your life, whatever feels most appropriate.
Good. Is it morning, afternoon, everyone? Do you know, I listened to you read my bio and I was looking around thinking, who is she talking about? That's not me. So there you go. Right, where do I start? I think I'll best kick off by just giving you a bit of an insight into my background and how I've got here. And I can sort of link that into what psychological safety means to me. I started off my career as a graduate engineer, driving my white van across construction sites, turning up on construction sites and being stared at for looking totally out of place. And then working my way up to becoming associate director of one of the largest engineering companies at the time, but having worked for small, medium-sized, and then large organizations, realizing the differences that I experienced working for those different types of companies. So back to psychological safety. I worked for a company that was extremely supportive, where I felt heard, where I felt that I had a voice, where I felt that I was supported, where I felt that I meant something, where I had a sponsor and didn't even know what a sponsor meant at the time, where I had a mentor and I didn't realize what a mentor meant. And I worked for an organization where that was taking off totally away from me. Wow. And the differences means that I fully understand what psychological safety means. Because when you're in an environment where you're heard, you perform your best. When you're in an environment that you're not supported and you feel that you don't have a voice, or if you have a voice, you would be shouted down pretty much, as sometimes happens in the construction industry, then you don't feel safe. And it's interesting that we talk about physical safety all the time, but psychological safety is actually what makes you bring your best self to work. So I know the difference, and I've worked in different environments, and for me it's so important that I create an environment. I mean, I started my business 13 years ago, and it was so important for me that I create an environment that is supportive, where people can have a voice and be heard. Because ultimately, we all have lots of issues going on in our lives. You know, we have families. There is always something. Life is never perfect. So the last thing you want to do is come to work and feel unsafe. So for me, it's so important that you feel safe, you feel heard, and that you feel listened to. So that's what it means to me.
Brilliant. That's really good, and thank you for relating it to your journey into where you are now. So obviously, we've also got the lens of leadership today in this lunch, and I think you're someone who's talked a lot and admired in terms of, you know, the way in which you've approached leadership. So, as a leader, how do you try to create psychological safety in your organisation?
So the first thing, and I mean, I've got two women in the room who work with me, and sorry, you knew I was going to do this, I'm sure you did, who work with me. I bring my vulnerable self to work. So I have open and honest conversations. I hope I do. Open and honest conversations, and I will seek out people when I need ideas. So I don't necessarily make decisions on my own. And it just means that you can create an environment where people can see that you're also vulnerable and I don't have all the answers, which gives them that sort of platform to also have a voice. Is that correct? Yeah, good.
Yeah.
I'm not paying them, by the way. Well, I'm not paying them to be here, but yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you are here, and actually, I think it's a measure of the authenticity of what you're saying, that you're happy to refer to your colleagues to add their perspectives. And honestly, we're going to come to questions in a minute, so from the audience. So feel free if you've got comments or questions that you've never had the chance to ask Roni before. The microphone will be coming your way soon. So another trait I think we associate with you, Roni, is resilience. And again, I'd love your thoughts on what does this mean in practice for you? Because sometimes resilience can be a thing which is almost in opposition to psychological safety, that, you know, you have to be resilient and not so sensitive to something. I'd just like to hear your thoughts on where resilience fits in and how you have nurtured your own resilience.
Right. I deal with challenges on a daily basis. You know, it's especially when you run your own business. When things are going well, nobody tells you about it. But when things go, when there are issues, you find out about it. And I think resilience is something that you build over time when you have a solution-finding mindset. So for me, it's always that sort of positive approach to what is the solution and how do we resolve this, rather than there is a challenge, there's an issue, there's a hurdle ahead in front of me. I'm constantly thinking about how do I jump over that hurdle, and I think somehow that enables you to build that resilience just to carry on and not give up, irrespective of the challenges that you face. And believe me, I've faced many. But I know that giving up is not an option. I know that failure doesn't exist in my dictionary. So for me, it's success, and it's unlimited success. So by focusing on that keeps you going constantly and just focusing on what the next step is.
And do you have times where you think, well, it's all very well being focused on solutions and success, but today I'm not feeling it? And how do you know, when you feel vulnerable? Because I think, again, psychological safety there's not a sort of absolute standard in that sense. It's subjective. We experience it differently. We all have different points of sensitivity, and we all have good days and bad days. Have you got some tools you use when you're feeling your resilience is low, or that positive mindset is just a little bit harder to access?
I do some mindfulness activities, actually. That really does help. It really does help. And it just helps you to re-engage your mind and focus on that positive side. And that's what I do, but also having a support structure around you. Because I do have some difficult decisions to make. And sorry, Josie and Claire, I'm going to do this as you're in the room, but some of the decisions I've had to make, there was recently a really tough decision, and I rang them up and said, what do you think? Because actually I can't make this decision on my own. What are your thoughts? And if I'm thinking the wrong solution here, what are your thoughts? And that does help sometimes when you face challenges, when you have a support structure around you that you're able to just reach out to. Because I think the danger here is that we feel that we have to be strong all the time and that we have to have all the solutions. I don't have all those solutions, but it's being able to reach out to others and to ask them questions. And I'm not scared to do that.
That's great. I was like, it's kind of practical tips, because
But I will also say that I'm irrespective of what's going on inside, I tend to have a calm demeanour about me. And inside, it may be just running at 2,000 miles an hour, but externally it isn't. And I think it's important that it's something I've had to learn over the years, is how do you calm yourself down? How do you calm those issues down? And how do you continue just to keep your mind focused? And I think it does help. It takes time. It does take time, but it's something I've worked on over the years.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think there's something around you channel your energy to where it can make a difference.
Absolutely.
And that does, as you say, take training, but it really helps when you can do it. So one aspect of psychological safety that you will have experienced, or rather the lack of psychological safety, occurs when biases and stereotypes and assumptions lead to people being treated differently. So in your experience, what can leaders do to offset the fact that we are all, as human beings, going to have biases and we're going to make assumptions? How can you create cultures in which that doesn't damage psychological safety for people?
Yeah, so we all have stereotypes in our mind. Everybody.
Yeah.
Every single person. You walk into a room and you judge that person in front of you because of how they look. Everybody does it. What I do say is that you can't blame somebody for that first thought that comes to their mind, but certainly I'll blame you for the second and for the action that you then take, because you've got that time to pause and really think about what you do about those biases in your mind. But for me, within the team, you know, we've had unconscious bias training, but we also have an open channels of communication, and we're still learning. And it's realizing that actually nobody's book perfect, and there is an opportunity to learn, and listening to your teams and understanding what their requirements are. So for instance, within Jomas, we set up line management. The team is speaking to their line managers weekly. They're feedbacking that to me, and everybody hopefully feels listened to, and that when they're speaking about issues, that you're doing something about it, rather than just sweeping it under the carpet.
Yeah, you're quite right. I mean, you know, it's not just about what's the thought that passes through your head, it's how does that then translate into action and you know, the way we're all treated. And that's a bit that we can influence in a very direct way.
That's what you can influence. I mean, a number of times, I mean, if you've done any research about things that I've spoken about, the number of times that I've walked into rooms and been mistaken for a tea person or somebody else. And the fact that somebody would look at you and make that assumption and still vocalize that stupid assumption. Sorry, pardon me. Yeah. You know, it's just holding back on that first thought and that stereotype that you have in your mind, and actually thinking about the fact that that person could be different to what you've assumed. And that really does create an environment where people feel supported, rather than the assumptions that you've made about them.
And I think it's also spot on that, you know, we need humility. We can't eliminate bias. We can't eliminate assumptions. They are in all of us, and we don't need to feel shame about that, but we can work on ourselves.
Absolutely.
And we can work to build our empathy and our awareness, and each of us have areas where we'll be more attuned to, you know, the fact waking assumptions, and there'll be areas where we're less familiar, and it's on us to try to work on that, rather than to feel that if we get this right and do all the training in the world, bias will never afflict us. It's not real.
It's not real.
I sometimes share this experience I had, which was of walking into a room where I was going to chair the meeting, and I went to get myself a cup of tea, and someone said, "Oh, good, there's someone here to pour the coffee." And we've all done that, let's be honest. And I said, "Oh, here we go again," in my head. And I said, "All right, well, I'm having tea, the coffee's there if you'd like to help yourself." And this person then, who was a white man as it happened, went to help himself to the coffee, and I realised he had a disability that meant he was wanting assistance with the coffee. And it was a brilliant, or if very discomforting experience, just to remind me that, yes, I might be subject to bias, but I'm also absolutely somebody who is at risk of bias as much as anybody else. So, humility is an essential quality here.
I think it's acknowledging the fact that we all have biases in our minds. I think the errors And the mistakes that people make is suggesting that I don't have any bias. I don't see anything wrong with you because you're a woman. Actually, that's untrue, because people do make assumptions. You go to pick up some heavy equipment, and you automatically assume that you've got the man has more strength than the woman. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. So it's just little things like that you suddenly realise that we all have biases in our mind.
I'm going to come to the audience in just a second, so get your questions ready. I'm just going to ask you one more question before we go out to the audience. Someone yesterday, actually, who works in a very senior role in construction said to me, or said to a group of us, that psychological safety is when it feels less safe not to say it than to say it. So in other words, that you feel the safe thing to do is to speak up, rather than the safe thing to do is to not speak up.
Yeah.
And it sounds like a soundbite. Actually, it's quite deep.
Yeah, it is.
And how can we just we're on our path of continuous improvement, but how can we go faster on this issue of making people feel that the only way to be safe is to speak up, rather than vice versa? Have you had any first-hand breakthroughs on that front?
So one of the things I talk about is actually thinking about the benefits also to the organisation. And I feel that organisations, it's the right thing to do first and foremost, to focus on everybody's safety. But actually, when you think about the benefits to your organisation of having a team who feel heard, who feel that they are safe, who bring their best self to work, actually benefits that organisation. So it's not just about giving back, because you're receiving as well. And I think it's changing that mindset within, particularly in engineering and construction, changing the mindset that we're making all these changes because we live in a woke environment. Actually, no, we're not making these changes for that reason. We're making these changes because it's the right thing to do, but it does benefit the organisation as well. And if we can change that viewpoint, then I think it would become a lot more acceptable and necessary to make sure that these things are in place.
Yeah, it's the hardwiring into business success in a way that feels real to people.
Absolutely.
It's not just, claimed, it's actually the day-to-day lived experience. Listen, I'd love to hear some thoughts or questions from anybody here, and if you would like to come back and think that Roni said, you're very welcome to, but no pressure. Who'd like to just ask a question or even share a comment? Because we're going to go into just table discussions after that. But it would be lovely to hear from more voices, and particularly if you're an early career engineer here, don't feel that we don't want to hear from you. We want to hear from you especially. We've got one at the back, I think. Michelle, please do introduce yourself. And
hello. Yes, I'm Michelle McDowell, fellow of the Royal Academy. I'm not an early career engineer, unfortunately. Roni, thank you very much for that. It was very interesting to hear, and I think we'd all probably love to work for you. But what are your recommendations for someone who's working in an environment where it is quite difficult, but you want to progress your career, and dealing with areas of psychological safety where with your boss, that sort of thing, you want to progress your career in a company?
So I mean, this is a really tough question, and it's something I've pondered over the years. And one of the reasons that I set up Jomas in the first place. So some organisations just aren't right and not ready for psychological safety, and depending on where you are in your career, they may not be the right fit, and that's the reality. But ultimately, what we should be doing is escalating that. So even though we've only got a small team of 25 at Jomas, we've got an HR manager who I've brought in as somebody who's there to be there and to listen to people. So hopefully, if they don't feel that they can speak to their line managers, they can reach out to her, and then she can do something about it. So that's what I would suggest, that if somebody finds themselves in a toxic situation, that they reach out to somebody else, and at least they've made their voice heard. And then if they're not listened to, then maybe it's not the right organisation for them. But I know certainly that for me and some of the experiences that I faced, I've had situations where people have sent emails or picked up the phone and said, that particular line manager really upset me and made me cry. And I went home and I was thinking about something that they said to me about my work. And for me, I found that crushing because, you know, we're all learning. And if someone's working and learning and they have got something wrong, so we have a no blame culture. So I'm very big on no blame culture. If somebody gets it wrong, we've all got it wrong. So it's not a case of pointing a finger and saying you've got it wrong and it's down to you, which the construction industry is very known for doing. So it's building that sort of environment. If they're not in that environment, then it just might not be the right place for them.
And the other thing I've found helpful, just alongside all those excellent points, is, you know, peer networks, groups of people that you trust and can share experiences with. It helps you to calibrate. Is what I'm experiencing okay or normal?
Yeah.
Because sometimes when you're in an organisation where something is accepted that isn't right, you actually think, oh, maybe it's just me, I'm an outlier. And so having those peer networks where you can share, and hopefully, you know, days like today where you make connections with people in other organisations, and have places that you can go to share and to ask, they all help to just, you know, at an individual level, make you feel more supported.
Absolutely. One additional point, I mean, we could talk about this particular question forever, but one additional point is having a mentor. So for anyone in their early career, is to try and secure yourself a mentor. And actually, if you can find a mentor that isn't within your organisation, even better. We run a buddy system so that people are supported internally, but actually externally, finding somebody who can give you the second opinion, because sometimes what you hear within your organisation, you may not be sure if that's right or wrong, but you can have that as a soundboard. Having a mentor who's external is really quite helpful, and they can sort of signpost and guide you if they think that some of that behaviour is not acceptable. Because the danger there is, and I sit around a lot of roundtable discussions around this particular topic, and I've heard from women who have, you know, been in environments where they felt really unsafe, and they've reported it to their superiors, and they've just been told to be quiet. And they just thought that's the right thing to do, is actually to secure my job. I'll just keep, you know, I'll keep quiet about this. But actually, by coming out and speaking up and speaking to somebody externally, they then find out that actually that is not the right thing to do. So I'd always encourage that if you can have a mentor externally, then do so.
And just to reassure you, we're doing lots of work across the profession to try to make sure that this is not an acceptable thing to be happening in this day and age. And the professional bodies that many of you will be connected with as well are very active here, and we've got a cross-profession works around on ethics, of which this is absolutely a part. So lots of things that we can share with you after the event if helpful. But yes, there's another question, Jaco.
And thank you, Roni. This is really powerful and very useful, actually, in terms of tools that you're employing. It's nice to hear. And I apologize again, not an early career engineer, Jaco Glassie from Newcastle University. And the reason why I wanted to speak is actually because I'm talking about those very, very early career engineers, those that we are educating. And I'm so pleased, Hayaatun, that you raised the question of ethics. And maybe this is a question to you, but to the room as well. Does anybody have tools to make our future engineers, so those that are studying with us, feel secure, even in a university environment, which absolutely shocked me, I have to say, this year, when I'm hearing from students where I'm provoking those difficult debates about the ethical decisions that we as engineers have to take. And they come to me after the session and say, oh, I was going to raise this, but it's very controversial. It doesn't feel quite right. And it worries me that they're leaving with the belief that they cannot speak up, even in a group of their peers in the university that's meant to be the debate and open-minded environment. How are those people then entering construction or whatever? I'm a chemical engineer, sorry, so it's just as difficult in there. But how are they entering this industrial world already believing that, ooh, I better not raise anything controversial, I better not talk about something because I get cancelled, I get whatever. I don't know whether you've met that in your work life, and if you've got some suggestions as to how we can start influencing people. I think it got worse actually since COVID, and I blame COVID for all sorts of things, but I think the damage it did in terms of relationships amongst humans and future engineers in particular in this sense, I think we'll feel for a while. So if there is anything you could help us with, that would be very good.
That's a really good question. And it's back to the point that you made, that we need to get to a point where it's safer to speak up. Because at the moment, we are, irrespective of all the work, all the fantastic work like that organisations like RAE are doing, people still feel, a significant proportion of people still feel that it's safer to be quiet. Because actually, if I don't say anything, then I can stay in my job. Then, you know, I'm not going to be picked on. Because I've listened to some really horrendous stories from young people who are working in industry, and they feel that, you know, if I speak up, then suddenly I am that person. I'm pointed out as that difficult person. And what we want to do is change it around so it becomes actually, if I speak up, I'm that person that wants to make change happen. And actually, this isn't just about me, it's about everybody else around me and those who come after me. So how can we make this work? For me, my solution to this is, you know, if I'm in the room with people and I really want to hear from them, I will pick on them. You know, if you pick on somebody, if you're particularly in a small group and you say, what do you really think? Then you hear their opinions. But if you sit in the room and you wait for people to speak up, then the chances are that there's somebody there with a burning question or a burning thought in their mind, and they're not going to say it. But as soon as you go, Catherine, what are your thoughts? And then it all comes out. Or actually, you can work it out from their facial expression, even if it doesn't all come out. But it takes courage, it takes confidence. And, you know, we'd be lying if we're sat here saying that we didn't struggle with confidence and courage at some point in our careers. So it's realizing that, and I say this very strongly for people in their early careers, and I say this to my mentees, even outside of Jomas, is that you might be looking at people at the top and on the stage and thinking they've got the greatest amount of confidence. Absolute rubbish. You know, we're all still working on it. So the realization that actually even those who are far ahead of you, and I always say the story, sorry for those who've heard me speak before, but I always say this, and this is a great story for me. It was many years ago, I was at the House of Lords, and the Chancellor at the time was going on stage and about to speak, and I was speaking after him, and I was stood there going, oh my goodness, you know, why am I doing this to myself? And he turned to the person next to him and said, I'm so blooming nervous. And I stood there and I thought, what? If he's nervous, then I've got this in the bag. So actually, so actually when you realize that those who are doing this on a daily basis are in the same position as you, just have a little bit more experience and a little bit more practice, then it gives you that courage and confidence to speak up. But my advice would definitely be pick on them and just ask them, encourage them in the most positive way to give you a comment. And it goes back to bringing your vulnerable self to that conversation. So this is my vulnerable self. I'm not perfect. None of us is perfect. But I want to hear your opinions, because it means that, and one of the things I say all the time to the guys at Jomas is that if you don't tell me, if I don't know what you're thinking, then I can't make change happen. But actually, if you speak up and you let me know about it, then I can. So hopefully by doing that, you're positively encouraging people to speak up and you're not shouting them down when they do.
Thank you, Roni. That was a really brilliant anecdote. And I haven't heard that before. Listen, I would love to hear from one of our early career engineers. I'm not going to pick on people yet. We've got hands up. Oh, we've got two. Oh, we've got two. Right. So
I'm fairly young, but I'm not an early career engineer. So we're halfway there, I guess. Firstly, I wanted to thank you guys for that conversation. I found it really valuable, especially as somebody who runs their own business. The concept of kind of relentless resilience and positivity is something that I can really relate to, and I'm trying to cultivate for myself. I also consult on diversity, equity and inclusion for different businesses, and I found that psychological safety is really the key for unlocking a lot of change within organisations. So senior leadership, when they have that psychological safety, can actually ask the questions that allow their minds to change and for actions to be put behind different kind of initiatives. My question is, psychological safety, I think we can all agree it's important, but it's also intangible. How can organisations measure and track any kind of advancements within this area across their organisation?
So really, how can we measure it? I actually like the idea of anonymous surveys. We did it once, and we will do it again. And it was mind-blowing, because you make so many assumptions about what you're doing right and what you're not necessarily doing right. And for most founders, particularly small organizations, and even CEOs, actually, you spend a lot of time thinking, even in your personal time, about whether you're doing things right or wrong. And there is also the danger that when you ask people to their faces for a 360 review, that you don't get the right thing back. But actually, when you do an anonymous survey, there is a lot that comes out of it. So in terms of monitoring the impact of initiatives that you've put in place, that's certainly something that was a turning point for me, was running that anonymous survey. And I have no idea who made some of those comments, but at least they're comments that have come within my organisation. So you know that there are things there that you may think is perfect that may not be perfect. So that's certainly something that I would recommend for really measuring impact, is rather than waiting for people to come back to you, is to try and do that survey and get them to speak openly, whether that's anonymous or if they feel comfortable coming up and speaking to you.
So I think we'll have lots of ideas from the tables about that, and that might be a really good one to come back with when we do our reporting back at the end. We are supposed to be having lunch now, but I can see Lucy's decided that we're going to have another contributor. So Lucy's the boss anyway, we all know that. So please just make your intervention as well. Yes, on table
Hello.
7.
So my name's Kim. I am an early careers engineer.
Hey, finally.
I'm still studying engineering. I have worked full-time in operational railways for 8 years, very male-dominated. And I just wanted to ask about hormones and your menstrual cycle and pregnancy, and how you deal with that in a male-dominated industry, because obviously we don't want to go backwards where it's the old trope of, oh, she must be on her period. But there is research, a lot of research coming out, and anecdotally, you know you are your best self at certain times of the month, and just how you bring that into the workplace and how you deal with that, and how you take a back step when you need to, and leading your team, leading women as well, and realising that, you can sort of help with that.
I love that question.
Yeah,
I just like
questions
it.
today.
I absolutely love that question. And again, I think in giving some responses, I've got to make it a little bit personal. So I grew up in a home with 4 older brothers, and I've got 3 sons. So actually, I'm constantly the only woman in most of my spaces, and the only one that suffers from that cycle that happens. So yes, I do. When you've got that moody cycle, it's already something that I've had to deal with growing up, rather than actually just in the workplace. But it's so interesting. I was speaking to my brother yesterday, and he was in a foul mood. And I actually said to him, do you know what? You are definitely in the middle of your cycle. I honestly think that even men have cycles. It's not just us. Sorry, I've gone off on a tangent. But that's because I spent so much time around men. And I think there is, we do have periods where we are going through, it's very, hormones are everywhere. But actually, I think that even with some men and boys, it's all over the place as well. So it's for me, the way that I deal with it, oh God, I'm trying not to get too personal with this, and I'm trying to hold back desperately. But I monitor my cycle, for instance. So I know that certain times of the month I feel a certain way, and didn't quite work out why I was feeling a certain way. So I started to monitor this. So my approach to a lot of things is about me first. So it's not about what everybody else thinks about me. It's about what I think about me and what control I have over my behavior and my actions, first and foremost, in everything that I do. So I monitor my cycle. I know when it's happening. I know when I've got those periods. And as soon as that kicks off, I know that it impacts on my behavior, and I know that how I can address it. But in terms of in the workplace, it's actually a really interesting question. I think should be a topic of our conversation around the table, because we're still trying to work it out. But how I've worked it out in my mind is that I know when I'm in that cycle and what's going on within me and how I manage that situation. But you have so much I can talk about, which just gets quite personal.
Well, we'll look forward to having very interesting table discussions. But I would say I think it's one of the biggest changes that hasn't been spoken about enough, is that it's now okay to talk about hormones in relation to the workplace in a way that isn't, kind of cartoonish or caricature or awkward to the same degree. And actually, if you don't mind, I'm going to mention my colleague Samantha here, who's leading our menopause employee resource group. And the first meeting we had, there were so many men of all ages who came along to that because they don't know anything about menopause because nobody's talked to them about it. And I think just the fact that we can now mention that in a very normal, integrated way is a sign of progress. There's a lot of nuance to your question, but unless we are comfortable with this being a work-appropriate conversation, we'll never make progress. So, wow, sorry we're running over, but this is good. I think I will at this point have to make sure I keep my promise that you get some food. Oh, Lucy's giving me more time.
She's enjoying it.
Lucy, who should we ask? No, I think this one here, Yolanda's colleague was.
Oh, sorry.
You were next to her, and I feel bad now. So sorry.
Yeah, thank you both. I just wanted to ask about any tips for more introverted people to get out of their comfort zone and to maybe vocalise their opinions and to maybe get involved in like more leadership roles. Do you have any advice?
Honestly, I love all these questions.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't believe it, but I'm an introvert to the T. So my comfort zone is in my home with my kids and Netflix, or that's my comfort zone, and I can stay at home. We've spoken about this before, haven't we? I'm quite happy. I don't have a load of friends. I'm not the best in terms of going out and socializing. So I am an introvert. But actually, I realise what my call to action is, and my call to action is, I've built a career. I've built a business that nobody else in the country that looks like me has done. I've had incredible opportunities because I have been that trendsetter. So I have a role and I have a job to be visible. And irrespective of how that is out of my comfort zone, that I have a job to do. So I go ahead and I focus on that job and I focus on that light that it is very much my focus. But how do you do it? It's a lot of work. It is a lot of work, and I'd be lying if I said it's a walk in the park, just step on the stage. And I think I was just saying to Mark, who sat next to me when he offered me a glass of water, that I'd much prefer if it was a glass of wine because I'm going on stage. So it's realising the fact that actually it is a lot of work. It takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of working on yourself and building that courage. But it also needs to be based on a purpose. Mm-hmm. So what are you trying to achieve? I will not come on this stage. We get lots of invitations to do lots of different things and we turn lots of them down. But actually, when there is a real purpose around it in terms of what you're trying to achieve. So I'm in the room today with women. It's International Women's Day. We've got people in early careers. I know that, and I hope that somebody hears my story and my journey and it propels them to also go forward and do something different. And that's what gives you that courage to get on the stage. It's the fact that you know that it's not about you, it's about somebody else. So if it's all purpose-driven, it does help you as an introvert to come out. But it takes a lot of work, a lot of practice for you to get there. And you know this.
I was laughing because we've had the conversation with actually introverts. We just have to do presenting differently today. But no, I think what's really important also, beautifully said, we don't have to change our personality type. No. What is it that motivates you, exactly as Roni just said? And then what skills might you need to acquire in order to advance that sense of purpose in the real world? And so it's very important to say if you're an introvert, you can be proud of the fact you're an introvert. And introverts can make amazing leaders. Yep. You don't have to be alpha, full volume leadership. You can be subtle, quiet, but sensitive leadership. Those are there's no right way of doing this. So it's the whole leadership journey is figuring out what's the best version of you that you can be in order to make the change you want to be. And so, if it's comforting, lots of us doing things that don't come that naturally to us.
Absolutely. There's a lot of danger in the construction industry to be somebody else. And it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of experience to build and get comfortable with being authentic in who you actually are. Because construction industry, there is an assumption that you need to be loud, you need to be brash, you need to have all these words in your back pocket, and that may not be you. So it's just getting really comfortable in this is who I am, but this is what motivates me, and I'm going to focus on that.
Oh,
Yeah.
so powerful. That is like, we have to end on that. That's like the perfect note to end on. And it's not really the end, because we are going to keep talking. And then at the when we've all had a good lunch together and a good chat together, we'll just share some reflections back. But for now, can we give Roni a huge round of applause?
Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely loved that you made it so personal, that you were really happy to share the interior. You know, sometimes people present the sort of, you know, this is the persona, this is the official me. It felt very authentic, and as a result, I think lots of us will have taken away things from that we can feel are relevant to the challenges that we're facing in our lives as well, and some very practical tips there, and really bearing in mind everything you've told us, all the more impressive that you have achieved what you've achieved, and we're grateful for it.